Good evening, everyone, and welcome to your legislative forum for the 2018 general election. I'm James Brooks, state reporter for the Juneau Empire, and your moderator for tonight's forum. We are live tonight at 360. Thanks to our co-sponsors KTOO, Juneau Votes, the Juneau Empire, and the League of Women Voters of Juneau for making this event possible. The general election is Tuesday, November 6th this year, but you can start voting early beginning October 22nd. We have 6 candidates tonight for 3 open seats representing northern Southeast Alaska in the legislature. For Senate District Q, which covers the entire region, including Juneau, Douglas, Haines, Skagway, Gustavus, and Klukwan, we have Don Etheridge and Jesse Keel. For House District 33, which covers Douglas, downtown Juneau, Haines, Skagway, and Gustavus, we have Chris Diamond and Sarah Hannon. And for House District 34, which covers the Mendenhall Valley and Airport, we have Jerry Nankervis and Andy Story. Thank you all for joining us. For those in our audience, tonight's forum has a simple structure. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement to introduce themselves. After that, we'll ask questions of each candidate. The questions have been submitted by members of the League of Women Voters and members of our audience here. Once we get going, I'd ask members of the audience to hold their applause until the end and make sure your cell phones are on silent mode. Each candidate will have a chance to answer every question we ask tonight. And as we ask additional questions, we'll start the questioning with different candidates so everyone has a chance to answer first. We'll move from left to right, starting with Don, continuing with Jesse, and moving on down the line. The first person will have a minute to answer the question, and since everyone else will have heard the question and an answer or two, everyone else will have 45 seconds. Our goal for tonight is to find out where each candidate stands on the issues that the next legislature will confront. Our timekeeper tonight is Cheryl GB, and she has a clock visible to the candidates on stage. When the time is up, she'll sound a bell. Just like that. We're expecting to be here for about 90 minutes tonight, and we hope you'll leave here with a better sense of the legislative candidates on November's ballot. With that, let's get started with the candidates from Senate District Q. Don, please give us your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening. My name is Don Etheridge. I'm running for the Senate in order to bring the sides together is what my hopes are. Well, I'm tired of being up there and both sides setting off into their own little sandbox and not sharing. So I want to try to get that put together and be able to work with everybody up there. I've been doing that for the last 24 years. I've been reaching consensus on a lot of different issues that I work on. I've been a hard worker all my life, so a little bit of work doesn't scare me off up there at all. I've been 25 years with the state of Alaska doing maintenance work on docks and in the buildings. I've done mechanic work. I've been up on the pipeline. I've commercial fished. And I've done a lot of hard work. And for the last 24 years, I've been up there with this legislature, and I have earned respect from those folks that are up there on that hill, and many of them have my respect because of the way that we're able to work together. And we're able to come up with solutions to issues that we're trying to get put together with. And if we can't get those solutions put together, then we have to just agree to disagree and find some other way to go get where we need to be. Thank you.
Jesse?
Thank you. Well, thank you, James, and thanks to KTOO and the League of Women Voters. Thanks to all of you for being here or for listening and watching tonight. My name is Jesse Keel. I'm an Alaskan born and raised. It's been my honor for the last 18 years to be a legislative staffer to Southeast Alaska senators, and for the last 9 of those for our current state senator, Dennis Egan. It's also been my real privilege the last 7 years to serve on the Juneau Assembly. I've worked in those capacities on a lot of important issues. In education, Juneau has always funded our schools to the cap and beyond, including an emphasis on skills training. This year we took extra steps to save an auto shop program that was subject to budget cuts otherwise. We've invested in public safety, focusing both on increased staffing at the Juneau Police Department and investments in more addiction treatment to come at our public safety problems from a comprehensive approach. We've invested heavily in infrastructure. I'm particularly proud of the North Douglas Highway extension, which I helped get funding for in the legislative aid capacity, and then worked on the Assembly to help make happen. We cut the ribbon on that just recently. We've rehabbed our docks and harbors, opened city land for housing, and we're restarting the North Douglas Crossing project. Working with Senator Egan in the legislature, we've worked on all those issues, plus countless more, from insurance issues to pensions, from commercial fisheries to utilities. It's really statewide service, and as your senator, I'll do that statewide service putting Southeast Alaska first. It's been my distinct honor to work on these issues for the last many years with people of every political stripe, and I look forward to continuing that if you'll honor me with your vote as the next senator from Northern Southeast Alaska. Thank you very much.
Chris.
Good evening. First, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event tonight, or putting this event on. Thank you to James, the Juneau Empire, and KTOO for hosting and moderating. And thank you to all of you for coming out tonight and listening to what the 6 of us have to say up here tonight, so that you better know who we all are. With that said, I am Chris Diamond. I am a husband and father to 3 children. I'm a organizer for the Carpenters Union, and I'm running for the House District 33 seat as an independent candidate. Now, I understand that independent candidates can be a little confusing and concerning for some people because you don't have a party label to attach to me to determine what my values are. But from the first day that I filed to run for this seat, I've been very clear on what my values are. I am typically a center-left voter, and I am running to create educational opportunities so that every child in Alaska has the opportunity and chance to grow up to be a healthy, happy, successful adult. And I'm running to promote policies that will create good jobs, that create a pathway to the middle class by paying livable wages. You know, I've spent several years now, the last several years up in the Capitol, watching, listening, and advocating for different issues that affect this district. And I've watched the partisan dysfunction prevent a lot of progress. I think it is time that we elect a representative that is willing to work with and listen to everybody in this district, to work across aisles. I believe that if we all work together, we can get this state back on track and allow our communities to thrive again. You know, government should and can work better. I'm not ready to give up on that, and if you're not ready to give up on that either, I ask you to please vote for me on November 6th. Thanks.
And Sarah.
Gunaschish Hatyadi, Gunaschish Akwan, Gunaschish Takukwan. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you to the Taku and Ak people whose land we all live on. I grew up in Anchorage before there was oil money and went to good public schools and a proud graduate of the University of Alaska system. And I remember that we made promises to each other as Alaskans before we got rich with free money that we'd have a plan for when that money went away. I chose Juneau as home over 30 years ago and married a man here over 20 years ago, and we've had a small business, but I spent my career as a public servant. I was a high school classroom teacher, spending my days making sure that kids were informed, engaged, and active in their community. And I was an over-engaged teacher, involved in teachers' union and volunteering in the community, and trying to make sure that we were all working towards the goal of a great Alaska for everyone, but still hearing those promises that we held, that we would always have good public schools, and that we would save our money for the future, and that we'd have it to share in perpetuity, because Alaska faced some complex social issues that we knew would take real money to address. I'm running because I don't think we've held up those promises, and that when we were suddenly faced with the price of oil plummeting, we didn't have a plan in place, and we weren't brave enough to take the steps we need, like taxing ourselves and looking at oil tax credits and reforming that so that we can start spending money on Alaskans again. I don't think we can continue to cut the budget, but I do think I can bring a skill set where we can all talk together and work together. Because as a school teacher, that's one of the things you realize. Everyone walks to the room with different skills, and you all have to work together. I hope to have your support in doing that. Thank you.
Jerry?
Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this event. Thank you, James, for moderating. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here tonight. I'm Jerry Nan Curvis, and I'm running for the House District 34 seat because I can make a difference for Juneau. I'd like to share with you 3 brief conversations I've had, some of the conversations I've had, while going door to door in the Valley this summer. 3 specific ones. I spoke with a young mother who had a special needs son. She was afraid to let her son go out in the front yard and play because 2 doors down was a meth house. I spoke to a retired gentleman who said he had to get a job to afford to be able to retire in Juneau. And I spoke with a young family who wanted to travel to a neighboring community with their daughter for an event. The ferry ticket for the truck and the family was over $1,000. Those 3 conversations speak to 3 of my priorities: crime, cost of living, and affordable access to Juneau. A little bit about me. I came to Juneau and have spent 24 years with the Juneau Police Department. I worked my way through the ranks from officer to sergeant, then to lieutenant, and I retired after 5 years as the captain. I retired in 2011 because I had the opportunity to go commercial fishing with my son, and I wouldn't trade those 6 years for anything. In 2012, I was elected to the Assembly. I've been there since. The last 2 years, I've been your deputy mayor. I'd like to tell you briefly about some of the volunteer things I've done. I've been the president of the Alaska Peace Officers Association, local chapter. I was on the Juneau Douglas Ice Association board. For 10 years, I was the president of the PSEA municipal chapter at the police department. For 10 years, I was a coach of youth baseball and hockey. I was an original member on the critical incident stress management team. I was on the chair for the mayor's task force, and I would love your support on November 6th.
Andy?
Hi, my name is Andy Story. I've lived on Tlingit land for 32 years. I would like to recognize the Akwan and the Takukwan for their caretaking of this place. I have my master's in social work. I'm involved in public service, including the last 15 years on your school board. One of the reasons I decided to run for State House was I was getting tired of implementing cuts to education because of the legislators' inability to balance the state budget in a responsible and sustainable way. My husband Mike is in the engineering business, and without a state capital budget, we've seen loss of construction jobs for building maintenance and needed infrastructure. In going door to door, I've heard firsthand the worry over safe neighborhoods and lack of funding for public safety. By solely relying on oil, Alaska exists as a boom and bust state. We are not providing adequately for the services we value. Expecting oil prices to stay high is not a fiscal strategy. We need a fiscal approach that will balance the budget, protect the permanent fund, ensure a robust and perpetual PFD, and provide needed public services and grow Alaska. I offer experience balancing multi-million-dollar budgets during tough financial times, experience with the legislative process, and connections with statewide leaders in rural and urban Alaska as a 9-year board member with the Alaska Association of School Boards, including serving as president, and as a co-founder and 14-year member of Great Alaska Schools. Alaska is at a crossroads. We can stick with the boom and bust cycle of oil prices, or we can invest in our people and infrastructure. Juneau needs a legislature that will work in a bipartisan way to do what is best for all Alaskans. I believe we will see another bipartisan majority in the legislature again this year. I hope to be part of that majority, but regardless, I will join whatever caucus that addresses the needs of Juneau and all Alaskans.
Thank you all very much, and we'll start with our questions with Don. This is a question that addresses something that most of you talked about in your opening statements. We know that the state has a significant fiscal gap, particularly if you consider the permanent fund dividend. And the question from this person says, what are your plans for closing the fiscal gap for the state of Alaska?
My plan is to work with everybody that's up there. Everything that's been on the table has to remain on the table to be talked about, worked out. And you have to look for common ground that we're able to come up with the votes, that we can get 11 on the Senate side, 21 on the House side, and get the governor to buy into. And that's what it's going to take. One person's ideas isn't going to carry it, because it's not going to happen that way. You have to have enough on the table that we can get enough people to buy into to make it a doable thing.
Thank you, Don. Jesse?
Fiscal gap in 45 seconds. Sure. State government always needs to look for ways to get more efficient. There are folks who do that now. I think there are still some parts of our oil tax structure that don't make business sense for us as resource owners, including the treatment of a new oil field as new oil at an incentive rate forever. We also need to sustainably use some of the permanent fund earnings along with constitutionally protecting a dividend for Alaskans. And then we also need to connect a healthy growing economy with the services state government needs to provide, which means some form of broad-based tax. I think an income tax is the most economically efficient and the fairest to Alaskans, in part because it gains a contribution from those who don't live in Alaska but earn their living here.
Thank you, Jesse. Chris?
All right. So I know nobody likes to pay taxes, but I do think that in the short term, we need to look at doing an income tax in this state. I believe that if we do an income tax and we have that discussion, that we need to have language in place to roll that income tax back as soon as revenues and oil production and taxes on oil companies reach a point where we're sustainable, so that we can roll that tax back and not be taxing the citizens of the state beyond need. I believe that if we keep it at $1 and do not take that tax off of the books, it keeps future legislative bodies from spending out of control, and it helps hold them accountable for our government. So,
Thank you, Chris. Sarah?
I believe we need to look at oil tax credits, because like Jesse said, an incentive to develop a field shouldn't be there once that field's developed. I don't think it should be there in perpetuity. I believe that we will continue to use a percent of market value of the permanent fund, and I think most significantly, we need an income tax. And I don't think it's a temporary basis. I think a 1% income tax last year would have generated $750 million. We wouldn't have had to use the permanent fund if we'd passed that bill, House Bill 115. And I think ongoing, we need to restore some of the deferred maintenance that we've had. I can't foresee in the next 40 years that we're going to generate an excess of revenue, but there are a lot of things we could do, like restore $12 billion to the CBR.
Thank you, Sarah. Jerry?
Thank you. I agreed with the decision to use a percentage of market value from the earnings reserved from the permanent fund. The second part of that discussion that needs to take place, however, is a discussion to set that rate at a certain level for the future, because it was only decided for 1 year. The rest of that discussion needs to be, what are we going to do from here on out with that? As it relates to an income tax, if we were to fund in this state just K through 12 education with an income tax, that would be $3,500 for each $50,000 that you earn. That's a lot. A lot of people talk about taxing the out-of-state workers. 17% of the workers. Are you willing to tax 83%, your friends and neighbors, to get that 17%?
Thanks, Jerry. Andy?
This is the most important issue that the legislature will face, is a fiscal plan. My fiscal plan grows Alaska. It's a mix of efficiencies, new or increased revenue, use of permanent fund earnings, making sure we have a robust and lasting PFD. We need to make sure that it provides certainty for businesses and it gives us a good credit rating. People will want to invest in here when they know we have a plan that takes care of our public services, which we value. I think it's also important that we do look to out-of-state workers, and I think there are some ways that you can give credits for residents on different revenue structures, and I will look to all fiscal solutions to make sure which ones can get bipartisan support.
Thank you. For our second question, we'll start with Jesse. And Jesse, in your previous answer, you had talked about the services the state needs to provide. And so for you and for the rest of the candidates on this panel, what do you consider the essential services the state should be responsible for? And is there anything the state is doing now that you think it should not be doing?
It's essential that the state prepare the next generation, and that includes a strong education from pre-K through the university system. It's essential that the state protect public safety. That includes police. It includes addiction treatment. It also includes our courts and our prosecutors and public defenders. It's essential that the state take care of rules within the business environment specifically to protect health, safety, and welfare. And I'm keen to point out that our occupational licensing rules should never be licenses to print money, just making sure that people have adequate training and that we have a way to take care of the occasional unethical actor. I think it's the lack of long-term thinking that can lead to waste in government. For instance, we've just heard the Marine Highway System decide that they want to use 2 day boats in a wildly new way at a cost of $15 million a vessel.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks.
Chris?
So education is the single biggest investment we make in this state. That is planning for our future and preparing our children for the future. That is priority number one. We have got to make sure that we're funding education so that every child can grow up to be a success in this state. I'll agree with Jesse that public safety should be a huge thing that we're funding in this state, as well as our infrastructure. If we want private businesses to invest in this community and in this state, we have to make sure that our roads, our bridges, our schools, all of our public buildings and pieces of infrastructure are maintained and developed, and it will inspire and invite private investment in this state so we can continue to thrive.
Thank you. Sarah?
Well, of course, our essential services, some of them are mandated in the state constitution, education being one of them. And I think that we need to address education at a much earlier age. We're one of the few states, kindergarten is not required by our state, but we've been covering it. And I would like to see us extend the state supporting preschool programs across the state. I think that's where we get the most efficiencies and long-term educational gain. I think in that age group, we start to identify some very other early expensive services of healthcare needs. I think across the state, we have a severe lack of addressing mental health services, and we need to make sure that we're doing that as soon as we can identify them at the community level.
Thank you, Sarah. Jerry?
Thank you. Infrastructure, vitally important. Education is essential. We need to continue to do that. Public safety is very important. And with infrastructure, that includes the Alaska Marine Highway. And the difficulty is going to be convincing the rest of the people in the state that don't utilize the Marine Highway that that is our highway and that is our life's blood that connects us all. And while it takes a lot of money to do that, it is critically important to the survival of all the Southeast communities is that we have that ferry system and that we have it adequately funded with ships that work properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Andy?
Public safety, if people do not feel safe, whether they're in school or in our communities, it's hard to learn, it's hard to function at all. And so public safety is very important. Education is, it's an economic driver. It brings back dollars into our communities. And of course, the early funding we can do is critical. It saves money inside the K-12 program. I also think it's critically important that we go back to local capital projects. That's what grows jobs. And it also takes care of infrastructure needs. It can help us diversify, and we can do some renewable projects around the state. And healthcare is so important. If we can free up dollars in healthcare, that can go a long ways to helping with our public employees' benefit packages and being used in other ways.
Thank you. Don?
I think the public safety education, including vocational training to folks, is very important for us. Public safety is definitely got to be right up to the top, because knocking on doors, that's what you see, security systems everywhere. People are afraid to open their doors. That's not right. We can't have that going. And the Marine Highway System is definitely the lifeblood of most of Southeast Alaska. So we've got to keep that system in operation and make it dependable again, and not having ships break down on a continuous basis. I think that's going to be a major priority of most of us in Southeast.
Thank you. For our next question, I'd like to follow up on that previous question, starting with Chris here. Is there anything that you think the state is doing now that it should not be doing? We heard a lot about priorities and things that you think should be emphasized, but is there anything you would cut?
So I think there's a lot of inefficiencies that we utilize. I work with Department of Labor quite a bit, and we're not having our contractors in this state submit certified payroll via an online computer system. So our workforce is spending wasted hours doing research to see if contractors are stealing our money and cheating their workforces. So I think we should be investing in computer programs and technologies that will help create efficiencies in the long term. I also think that we need to stop giving huge tax credits away. We need to look for efficiencies where the government can get I'm not saying that we need to take bigger portions, but that we need to sit down and work with the oil companies and make sure that what we're getting is our fair share and that they're able to still be profitable within this state. I think that's two areas that would benefit Alaska.
Thank you, Chris. Sarah?
I do not have areas that I think that the state is spending money that we shouldn't be spending money on. There are services that the state provides that in other states we don't. Our state provides restaurant inspections, for instance. But since most of Alaska does not have local governments that'll do that, I think it's important that we have restaurant inspectors. Now, those are the kinds of programs that I don't want to see go away. And I think that in the last 5 years, we've started to cripple Alaska from being able to develop new businesses because we don't have good, sound, efficient operation of the state services we do have. If we as a state decide we want to do things radically different, if we don't want local courts, if we don't want local trooper posts, we could save money, but I don't think in the long run that's a cost benefit to the entire state.
Thank you, Sarah. Jerry?
Thank you. Efficiencies, as you've heard mentioned already, are very important to look at. I know for some folks that work with the state, shared services is a phrase that they don't like to hear. But we do need to look at how we do business. Is there a more efficient way to do it? And if so, we should probably do it that way. We have also increased Medicaid spending, and Medicaid spending in and of itself isn't bad. The reimbursement that we're getting from the federal government isn't what we expected, I know, and so we need to carefully look at whether we want to continue to expand Medicaid. However, when you're looking at that, you need to understand it's a fixed pot of money and it's only going to go so far. What is going to be our top priority?
Thank you, Jerry. Andy?
I think Medicaid expansion is critically important for our state. It's been the one bright spot in jobs in our economy, but it's saved lives. That is one area. I was certainly in every area you're always looking for efficiencies, and I think we should be doing efficiency audits. I know in Utah they did one of their Health and Social Services Department and they saved $100 million. And so you're always going to be looking at your budgets. But I think another thing that is really important is that we have to always look at how things change, and like right now they have found a lot of oil on the North Slope and they have more ways to drill that are less expensive, and so I think we need to revisit how we're partnering with our oil and gas companies. I think that would be helpful.
Don?
The one question I always ask people when I'm looking at budget issues, when I was on the assembly here, I asked the same question. What service would you give up? Not what are you going to take from somebody else, but what will you give up? I've never had anybody answer that question yet. I think that we do have efficiencies that we need to get straightened out. I see a lot of waste in the state, and I know where a lot of it is at, and when I'm in the Finance Committee, I'll take care of that.
Thanks, Don. Jesse?
Well, I think there's an excellent point, right? What I want is an essential and what you want is frippery. And we have a lot of work to do to educate our colleagues elsewhere around the state. And as we work with them, often we see that some of the things we initially looked askance at are important to their districts and their regions. I mentioned earlier the potential for even more investment in technology. I know there's been some bumps along the road, but eventually I think we'll get there. And then the need for long-term thinking. You know, we have 2 vessels that were built as day boats to improve service in Lynn Canal. We're $120 million in, and there's a new proposal to spend $15 million each and change their designation. I think the Marine Highway System Reform Project can add some long-term thinking to our marine highway system and its management.
Thank you. For our next question, we'll start with Sarah. Where do you stand on oil taxes? This is something that you in particular have addressed briefly, and I'm interested in hearing from the others as well. What changes would you make, or what ideas do you have?
I do think that we need incentives for development, but once a field is operational, I don't think that incentivizing you to keep pumping is where we're at. I want to remind everyone that we're the owner state, and we're supposed to make sure that we're getting our fair share. And we've sometimes postured that if we change our oil structure, the companies will pull out. And my contention is the United States is still one of the safest developing places for oil in the world, and it will remain so. And as much as we think right now we might have some instability in our economy, it's nothing compared to the instability in world economies. So Alaska, as an owner state of a shared resource, we need to be frugal about making sure we're not pumping out oil just because we could sell it today. It is something that we should expect to have developed over the next 50 to 75 years for good long-term economic growth.
And I'll stop you there. Our clock didn't start at the correct time. But Jerry?
Thank you. We need to make sure that we have a fair and equitable tax structure. We need to have one that works for both the developers and for the state. And it needs to be predictable if we want to encourage responsible resource development, which I think is critical to the future of this state. We need to have a tax structure in place that encourages that development and brings the money in. More investment we get means more jobs. More jobs means good things for our town. Currently, we've lost almost 800 state jobs in this town. And we can't continue to get by with almost 800 fewer jobs every year. Well, not every year. That's in the last 6 years we've lost that many. Thank you.
Andy?
I think that this is a question that is would be best done with the stakeholders. I really am supportive of responsible resource development, and I think that it was good to revisit and sit down with the partners and look at. I know we've gone from at times having 30% revenue from oil down to 8% revenue from oil in the different tax structures that we have used. And so I think we want to certainly be open and willing to revisit how we do things. We've been, I know for 30 years we didn't change the tax structure, and we've changed it a few times in the last 7 years.
Thank you, Andy. Don?
I think we need to sit down with the producers. We need to sit down with all those investors in that oil fields and work out an issue. And once we get something figured out, we need to lock it in and stay there for a while. Every year of changing the tax structure or talking about changing the tax structure, I think it's harming our producers, it's harming our state, and I don't think it does us any good as far as for oil production.
Thank you. Jesse?
Thanks. I raised this earlier. I do think the incentive rate for a new oil field shouldn't go on forever. 7 years when the investment is amortized, when the bonds are paid, there are options that we can work on. I also think that we should look again at having some progressivity in our oil tax structure. So when there are giant run-ups in the price, for whatever reason, Alaskans capture a slightly larger share. I think ACES was probably too steep, but I think what we have now is almost a flat tax structure, and that doesn't make sense for us as owners of the resource. And that's who I think legislators are bound to protect in these issues, is Alaskans as the owners of the oil and gas. Finally, if the gas line gets customers, I think we may need to look seriously at how we tax gas and splitting
Thank you,
that from
Jesse.
oil.
Chris?
So I think that we need to find a middle ground there between ACES and I believe it was SB 21 with the amount of taxes that the oil companies are paying and what we're receiving for our resource. There has to be somewhere in there that's equitable for them and equitable for the state, and then stick with that. We can't keep changing the tax structure every couple of years. It's going to create an unstable market, and that will push out oil companies if we keep flip-flopping back and forth. So let's find somewhere sort of in between the two tax structures, and let's stick with it for a while and make it work for the state.
Thank you. For the next question, we're going to start with Jerry. We've heard some discussion about this tonight, but as a member of the legislature, what will you do to increase access to childcare in Alaska?
Well, first, I would look at addressing the federal regulations that recently we have tried to change our state rules to accommodate the federal regulations. And my conversations with people walking around, one in particular, said that that was driving businesses under, trying to comply with the federal regulations that the state has adopted. It was making it, her words were that the state was creating the crisis by enacting all these rules for the daycare providers. Onerous rules is what they felt for the daycare providers. I think what you need to do is what we've done here locally. We've worked on the zoning ordinances locally to try and allow daycare facilities in a much greater part of the town. We've offered incentives through the Assembly for the HEARTS initiative and the AYEC initiative, as we're giving right around $100,000 to those two.
Thank you, Jerry. Andy?
Thank you.
Yes, I think we need to be looking at regulations to see how in alignment they are with some that keep our kids safe. That's obviously number one priority. But also make sure that they're not too keeping people out of business. Where can we align them and have them go smoother? The other thing I think we really need to think about is paying a fair wage to childcare workers. If they do not receive a fair wage, they're not going to go into business. I mean, what are we, do we need to be looking at minimum wage? We need to, a minimum wage law, James, you're looking puzzled, for some of our very important roles.
Thank you, Andy. Don?
I think that we definitely need to look at the regulations. I've seen too many times where regulations actually put businesses out of business because they try to over-regulate. And I do agree we've got to keep our children safe, and then we have to watch it real close that we are making sure the children are saved. My wife and I, we take care of our grandkids so that our kids can afford to work and make a living, but it's not open for everybody. But I do think that if we look at the regulations and try to streamline it a whole lot more than it is now, I think we can get there.
Thank you, Don. Jesse?
Oh, excuse me. Thank you for this question. This is a really vital issue. I'm glad somebody raised it. And we have done a lot of work at the city. I'm particularly proud of having launched and written that zoning regulation, a change at the CBJ that was referred to earlier, and for having voted for the first time. We supported early childhood educators with that HEARTS initiative. Both of those helped. At the state, however, some of those regulations made things tough for providers. And so we need to work with providers not to compromise on childcare quality or safety, but to make sure that new rules come with new resources and training for early educators to meet those requirements if we're going to place them as a state. This is a vital issue to our families and to our economy. Parents need to have good, safe, quality childcare to work.
Thank you, Jesse. Chris?
So I think we need to take the oversight and move it away from public assistance and back towards education. This is daycare facilities and providers are watching our children. This should be based on education, on the education department creating oversight. We also need to work with licensed facilities to figure out which regulations are too onerous and creating the cost issues that are prohibiting daycare facilities from being able to hire licensed qualified people. We also need to look at getting a grant writer. Alaska's missing out on a ton of money in this state that we should be able to, that we could be getting grant money from the federal government to help pay for some of these services and costs.
Thank you, Chris. Sarah?
Well, I'm going to take a radical step and go back to something we encouraged 15 years ago, which was every public building should have a daycare facility built when it's built. And in the facilities that we currently have, I think in many of our communities, in places where we're going to have a lot of young parents, whether it's a school district building or a public hospital, that you need to dedicate some space to have a daycare facility. Not run by the government, contracted out. We did it for our state legislature. We made sure that our expansion of legislative offices included a daycare facility so that legislative employees would have childcare for their kids. And I think we need to do that across the state because there are many communities where the facility is the major stumbling block to building a daycare program. And I want to see us do that.
Thank you. For our next question, we'll start with Andy. And we've talked somewhat about the fiscal gap and the fiscal straits the state is in. Earlier this year, we also saw the legislature embark on a plan that calls for increased school funding starting next year. And I'm curious what your position is on increasing school funding amid what might be a budget crisis or a budget issue. And the question after Andy will go out to all of you, but can you please explain your position on school funding?
I think it's critically important that we increase our funding towards schools. A $100 increase is $30 million statewide. So when I talk about a fiscal plan, we need to be making some strategic investments for things that we value. And we also have lost some ground in the last few years. So should there be a glide path, so it should be $125 to help making up ground. And we have to remember that we are talking about positions, jobs that we can keep for our kids. If we can keep teachers hired, we're saving money and not having to retrain staff. If we have to give them a pink slip and then we lose them, and so we have to hire somebody else from down south because someone leaves because they don't think that they have employment here. So to me, it is just critically important that we increase our funding for education.
Thank you. Don?
I think the education is definitely very important. We need to fund education, and we need to forward fund education so schools have the opportunity to plan ahead, and they can do a better job if they have the ability to plan instead of just wait until the last minute and think, oh, now we can do that, and no planning time is just a terrible way to try to work. And I would also include vocational training in that. We need to get vocational training back in the schools so that we can train some of our kids that's not planning on going to college so that they can go to work when they get out of school in a trade. And I think it really will make a benefit to the whole community.
Thank you, Don. Jesse?
Thanks. You know, there's no better investment in our families and our economy than the next generation of workers and entrepreneurs. So I think, this year is the first year in 3 or 4, we did roughly half a year's inflation proofing. Forward funding is important, but we have to keep up with the buying power of the dollar. I mean, it's just vitally important that we invest in education. There are some other things that we can do along with that. I think the Alaska College of Education, which is now centered at UAS, and I worked hard on that on the Assembly, can grow more Alaskan teachers. That can reduce turnover, especially in our rural communities. That can help our schools operate both more effectively and more efficiently. We also, I think, should increase teacher retention by returning the option of earning a pension. We're the only state in the union where that's not available to our teachers, and that's vitally important.
Thank you, Jesse. Chris?
I've said several times tonight that education is the single most important investment we can make in this state. We have got to ensure that we're giving our children the educational opportunities that they need, whether that's vocational classes, art classes, life skills classes. Those classes not only give kids the opportunity to maintain and take care of their homes in the future, whether they go down a VOTEC path or whether they go down a college career path, but those life skills classes and art classes keep our children engaged. Those are classes that help keep children to see themselves through to graduation. We've got to make sure that we're paying for those types of classes and funding education, forward funding it, and providing like Jesse said, our teachers need a defined benefit so that we have a stable workforce.
Thank you. Sarah?
Well, as a career educator, of course, this is a passion for me, and I don't think that we can save any money by deferring maintenance on our children. We have to invest in every child's education every year they're there, and I think we need to start earlier. I want the state to have a state-operated preschool program. Not mandatory, but I want 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds who currently arrive as kindergartners and first graders without the skills to succeed to have the opportunity to get them if they don't come from a home that can. And I think 20 years down the road, that gives us some cost savings when it shows us how well kids can learn if they get the same start as everyone else. We talk about it as a budget item because it's our biggest expenditure, but it is not an area where it saves us any money to not fund
Thank you, Sarah.
education.
Jerry?
Thank you. I think we need to continue to forward fund like we did this last year. We shouldn't have the teachers getting pink slipped. They should know that they've got a job coming up. I'd also like to speak to growing our local teachers. We are hiring far too many teachers from out of state to teach Alaskan kids. To that end, the municipality has given $1 million with the help from a bunch of the citizens in town as well, given $1 million to the Teachers Excellence Fund to push education at our local university, grow our local teachers. We will keep them longer. Also, I wanted to speak back real quick to what somebody else said. If we've got room in our schools to put more facilities in there, such as daycare facilities, we need to utilize that space. We've lost kids, we've got space, we can get them in there.
Thank you, Jerry. Now that we've reached the end of the table, we're going to switch directions. Andy will have the next question first. After that, Jerry will answer first, then Sarah, and so on down the table. It's designed to give everyone a chance to go in different orders, so no one person is following another. And so, Andy, we'll start this round with you. 2 other candidates have brought this up during the last discussion. But how do you feel about the defined contributions retirement system, what's known as Tier 4? Are you interested in any changes to it? Do you think it needs to be changed? And that question, again, will go out to all other candidates as well, but starting with Andy.
Yes, I think we need to change to going back to defined benefit or defined contribution, to having a choice for that. I think that it really helps retain. I know when we've been talking about crime and talking with many police officers, they have said that to be able to retain and keep police officers is important to look at our benefits and go back to offering a defined benefit or defined and a choice, defined benefit or defined contribution. I know our Senator Egan had a bill on this, and he was showing that we actually would save money going out. Actually, we would save money to the state coming back. Part of it is right now our teachers come, I'm using teachers as an example, maybe for 5 years, and then they can take their 401k. It be portable, it goes with them, and we have less of a pool and people keeping in and growing the interest off of that.
Thank you, Andy. Jerry?
Thank you. I am a retired Tier 1 employee with defined benefits, not defined contributions. And as I walked around the community this summer, I was surprised at how many young workers said they liked the defined benefits, the defined contributions, because that allowed them to go somewhere else. Many millennials now don't do what I did, which is join a department, for me, a police department, and spend 20 to 25 years there. A lot more of the workforce now spends 5 to 7 years somewhere and will have 5 careers as they go through their adult life. I like both plans. I don't know how much traction they will get in the House. What we currently have, though, is we've got approximately 100,000 eligible members.
Thank you, Jerry. Sarah?
I support restoration of the defined benefit system for public employees in Alaska. 10 years ago, when we did away with that system, we were able to predict that it would create a huge problem for our professional workers, and we've now seen it. Public safety officers is the one that gets talked about the first, educators, but on down the line. And I think our lowest paid public employees are the least likely to be able to save enough in a defined contribution to ever have a benefit package that they could retire on. And I think that's a real shame that we've created a falsehood that you'll never be able to retire with that. Along the way, I know that it's an expense that is going to be hard for us to wrap our heads around. So I'd like to look at the idea of separating from workplace benefits a public
Thank you, Sarah.
health service.
Chris.
So as a union member, I really appreciate that I have a defined benefit and that my members have a defined benefit. It gives us a pathway to retire with dignity. It ensures that our members are going to stick around and work this career until the end of their working career. And I think that our state employees and our teachers and our police officers and firemen, they all need that stability to know that at the end of their career, they can retire with dignity and be able to survive in this state. So I support moving back to a defined benefit, or at a minimum having the option of a defined benefit or a defined contribution.
Thank you, Chris. Jesse.
Well, I wrote Senator Egan's bill, so I'm fond of it. The option of having a real pension, because public workers in Alaska don't earn Social Security like the private sector and often stand to lose private sector Social Security benefits they have earned. That option will reduce turnover. It will save the state money in the near term, and it will be cost neutral or better for Alaska in the long term. And when I talk about saving money, remember that recruiting, equipping, and training a new police officer in Juneau or Haines is more than 150,000 local tax dollars. A state trooper is 190-some thousand. The beauty of a choice is if you plan to leave Alaska soon, you can choose the defined contribution and take your retirement account with you. If you plan to stay and retire here, you can choose a pension.
Thank you, Jesse. Don?
I support going back to the defined benefit program. We've become a training state for every other country and city in the state. And Juneau has especially become a very good training ground for Anchorage because they pay so much better in Anchorage than we do here. And without having a decent retirement, it doesn't give people an incentive to stay here. And if you give them a portable retirement system, they'll stay here, they'll get their training, and they'll go somewhere else anyway. So I think we need to have a defined benefit to encourage people to stay and work off some of the training costs that we've put into them.
Thank you. And next question, Jerry? Alaska has the fastest growing senior population in the country. What should the Alaska legislature do to help older Alaskans remain in their own homes and avoid institutional care?
Well, for one, we'll need to continue to offer the $150,000 property tax forgiveness on the first $150,000, of your property value. I think we need to continue to look at ways to allow people to work. Back to my earlier comment about the gentleman that was retired but said he had to work to stay in the community. There's many people, like myself, who's retired, that find there's a lot of other things to do if you choose to do them. And I think we need to have an environment that has jobs that allow people to do things as they retire. As an example, we have a docent program over at the State Museum that allows a lot of people to come in and volunteer. It's not a job that you get money, but it's a volunteer position to go and do some work and give back to the community. And you would be surprised at how many people there are that want to do just that, give back to their community.
Thank you, Jerry. Sarah?
I presume the nature of that question is about healthcare abilities and staying in your own home, because I think when we're young and healthy retirees, we're not really talking about that. We're talking about people who need services when they can no longer live independently. And as we approach that, if you haven't faced that with elder care, the dilemma becomes that many insurance coverages won't cover for in-home care unless it's a skilled worker or if they're not a family member. And I think we really need to, as a state, address how do we provide services at the community level? So in villages, elders can stay in place and the communities can provide training and skilled care for them. And I think we have to look at it in a radically different way because it is a benefit to the state.
Chris?
Yeah, I think that seniors have paid their dues. They have spent their careers working and building in this state. they should have a reduced tax system. The burden of the infrastructure that we're all utilizing should not fall on those that have charted the path in this state and paid for the services that we grew up on. It's now our turn to take care of those services on ourselves and not depend on retirees to be paying out of their limited incomes to fund services for us that are capable and able to work.
Thank you, Chris. Jesse.
Thanks. Our growing elder population is a tremendous benefit to our communities, to our families, to volunteerism, to our economy. And so it's wonderful that we are the fastest aging state in the nation. And need to continue to take steps to help our elders stay here. We made our senior sales tax program sustainable in Juneau. On the Finance Committee, I helped launch an effort to work with Senior Citizen Support Services to see if there were ways the city could help create more assisted living. We worked with SAIL, Southeast Alaska Independent Living, to supplement the caravan service we offer with more lift-equipped taxis, accessible taxis. So I think ultimately when it comes to keeping people in their homes, there's a healthcare component. And at UA...
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Don.
I do support the taking care of the seniors. I am one now, but I do think that we need to be spending more on taking care of our seniors, because they did put this state together and they've worked at it to keep it there. And I think that we need to take care of them, and I think that we need to provide the mobile health care that can get out to them, or transportation that can get them to where they need to get medical treatments. I deal with that with my own father on a continuous basis. In fact, right now he's in surgery at this moment down in San Diego. So I think we need to take care of them.
Thank you, Don. Andy?
One of my first jobs when I came to Alaska was being a home health aide, and that's what I did. Was I went into people's homes and I helped with their daily care so they could stay in home, ran errands for them, and I'm not familiar with how well we're doing with those programs right now and funding them, but I certainly think that that is a priority. I also think that the more options we have for housing, assisted living is critically important, and that's why I think it's local capital projects are also something that this community could decide to recommend to get a match with some dollars that they put forward for senior living. And I know that they just funded something kind of very similar to that, and in partnership with other groups.
Our next question will start with Sarah, and this is a topic that I think some of you had wanted to address but were cut off because of time. What is your view of healthcare access to Alaskans? Should it be a publicly funded right? Should it be decided by the free market? And what do you intend to do in the legislature to bring that about? Sarah?
Oh, I love this question. 35% of our budget in this state is tied up in delivering health to our citizens, and we're not healthier. With the amount of money we spend treating disease and illness, we face an economic crisis. We have to turn our whole lens around and start incentivizing people being healthy and delivering services much earlier, before they're ill and diseased and we're treating and recovering from it. Many of our long-term expensive diseases are identifiable very early on. Things like diabetes, type 2 diabetes, that we could treat and prevent, but we don't because insurance doesn't cover it. So I want to switch the lens and make sure that we are addressing the health of Alaskans at a community level, and I think we really have to address local community health care centers to be able to address citizen needs in their communities, including telemedicine.
Thank you, Sarah. Chris?
So Medicaid, healthcare is a huge divisive subject. I think what we should do as we work through how we're going to pay for healthcare for people, we need to start incentivizing small businesses to do like our union does, where we have a private health trust that negotiates on behalf of all of our members to get us healthcare at a reduced cost. I think that if we can do something like that with small business owners across this state as one big pool, that we would really work to lower healthcare costs and get people into an insurance plan so that they have the resources necessary to ensure that they're not going bankrupt when they get sick. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chris. Jesse.
You asked the broader questions. Rather than go back, I think Medicaid expansion was a tremendous and an excellent step for Alaska. It's both helped the economy grow and it's attracted more providers to our state. More importantly than that, there are another roughly 40,000 Alaskans who have access to preventive and regular care. That's tremendous. I think we need to continue to work, however, on the private sector portion of the market, on things like costs, and there's been a lot of innovation in our state. You've heard some other folks mention some. The state recently won an award for some of the insurance legislation that was passed that helped lower the costs in the private insurance market. Some of the work that's being done toward managing chronic conditions and helping people be healthier is tremendously valuable. There are still communities in our district without access to a doctor year-round.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Don.
Thank you. The plans that Chris started talking about there is something that we've put together through a coalition of all the unions, and many businesses have weighed in on that. And we're able to cut our healthcare costs tremendously through that coalition by negotiating with doctors, with providers, with the hospitals, everybody. We're able to make it a whole lot better plan for our membership by doing that. And I think that the state can do that. And I've talked to the state legislature about that for years, and they keep saying, oh, we can't do that, we can't do that. Well, yes, we can.
Thank you, Don. Andy.
This is something that really has to have a lot of care and looking at what we're going to do about paying for health care. I know that voluntary pooling has been talked about in this state. I know that many of our school districts have different plans, and in looking at consolidating some of those plans, you really have to go to all the partners and stakeholders who are involved and what will the consequences be of that. I think that one thing that when we're looking at health care, Medicaid expansion definitely was a big help, and we want to continue doing that. I think that I know that the legislature funded looking at different healthcare delivery models, and we will be bringing that back to the legislature if that is we should go forward with some of those.
Jerry.
Thank you. Somebody else mentioned this as well. Prevention and early intervention are essential to reducing the costs. You just heard about pooling. That has been an option that is discussed. What else I would like to see us look at is what I call open borders on healthcare. Instead of having healthcare not be able to be represented across more than one state, have open borders and get more competition in here. I believe the competition as well will reduce the costs. The city has actually done a great job keeping healthcare costs down through prevention, through healthy lifestyles, and through a program that we call, I can't read my writing right now, not good starts. Yeah. We've done a great job at keeping our costs flat for years now.
Thank you, Jerry. We'll start with Chris for this next question.
Health yourself. I remember.
Thanks. So, Chris, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, will you support state-level protections for legal and safe abortion services in Alaska?
Yes,
Why or why not?
Yes, I will. I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I don't believe that anybody should be come between what my wife or either of my daughters or any woman in this state discusses or does with her doctor. That is her personal business. That doesn't mean I support abortion, but that is not my business or anybody else's business. That is between a woman and her doctor. So I would support any legislation needed to ensure that a woman has the right to do what she wants to do between her and her doctor.
Thank you, Chris. Jesse.
Absolutely, and unequivocally. Roe v. Wade was decided on the right to privacy. Alaska's Constitution has a stronger and explicit right to privacy compared to the federal Constitution. But I think more than that, there's a real equality issue in that a woman's decision whether or not to become a parent has to be her own if she's to be an equal person under the law. The decision to have children for my family, my wife and me, brought tears of joy. It doesn't bring everybody the same kind of tears. The issues are deep and emotional and powerful and vitally important, and they are issues of autonomous personhood. To be fully equal, we have to have fully equal rights. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Jesse. Don.
I think there's a lot of questions that have to be answered yet on that issue. What is the overturn going to do? And then the other issue that I bring up quite often is, what are we going to do with a lot of unwanted children if it is overturned? How are we going to take care of these children? We can't take care of the unwanted children we have now. We're lacking foster care, we're lacking OSHA care. How are we going to deal with that if it is overturned? But I think we have a lot of questions to answer before we ever make any decisions, one way or the other.
Thank you, Don. Andy.
As Jesse said, if Roe versus Wade was overturned, our Alaska Constitution has very strict privacy laws, and that would be a decision made between a woman and her doctor, and I support that wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Andy. Jerry.
Thank you, James. I don't believe it will be overturned, and I'm not understanding all the fretting over whether that will or won't happen. But if it does, say take the step that it does, I think, as others have mentioned, we've already set that precedent in our law and with our privacy issues, and that question has already been addressed at the state level.
Sarah.
Absolutely. If Roe v. Wade was overturned, the state needs to make sure that we defend Alaskan women's right to make their own decision about their bodies. But we need to go one step further, and we need to make sure that there is access to health care, education, birth control, and pregnancy treatment, however that woman needs it, for all women. Because women of middle class have always had access to birth control and abortion. And it's poor women who are left without choices. I'm the middle daughter of 3, raised by a strict Catholic mother who sat us down when Roe v. Wade passed and said, you girls will have choices in your life that my generation never had. And I want to make sure that every woman has a choice.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question, we'll start with Jesse. Do you support the passage of statewide equal rights legislation to prohibit discrimination against employees on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and why or why not?
Thank you. I do. And I had the opportunity to work with an incredible broad group of citizens here in Juneau to write Juneau's comprehensive equal rights law that included those protections for the capital city. Sitka followed that example. I only wish we were first, but Anchorage beat us to it. Statewide, I think it's important that every Alaskan have the ability to have a place to live if they can pay the bill, to work a job if they've got the skills, to live life on their merits, unrelated to who they are and how they were born. Those protections, that fundamental equality, is essential as a matter of justice. They're essential, that equality, as a matter of the economy. It's important to being the kind of Alaska where we want our kids and grandkids to grow up.
Don.
Thank you. In the union movement, we always protect the member. No matter what their issue is as long as they are in the right when they're on their job. And I completely agree that we have to protect them. I don't care what race, creed, color, sexual origin they come from. It doesn't make any difference. We always protect the workers, and that's where I'll be.
Andy.
Absolutely critical that everyone is free from discrimination and is protected. When I was on the school board, we updated our discrimination laws to protect those kids who are anyone, not to discriminate based on gender identity or sexual orientation. And I think that it's critical.
Jerry?
Well, everybody needs to be treated fairly and equitably all the time. And I can tell you that the 24 years I spent enforcing laws in the community, I made it a point to make sure that that never played a role, their gender, their race, their religion, ever played a role in the decisions that we made regarding enforcing the laws. And that's the way it should be.
Sarah?
Absolutely. I will support an equal rights bill, law that makes sure that Alaskans are not discriminated against because of gender, race, age, ethnicity. And I think I'd like to see us take out of our Constitution our constitutional definition of a marriage that is discriminatory and non-enforceable. And I think it's an embarrassment to Alaska to still have it in our state constitution, because we're better than that. We are a state where people are judged on their merit and their effort and their work, and we need to remind ourselves of that sometimes, that we look to our neighbors for what they do, not what label they carry. So I'd support that law.
Chris?
I'm in agreement with that. I would support any bill that creates equal justice across this state for every man, woman, child. There's no room for discrimination in this state. Again, like Don said, as a union member, we don't discriminate in any avenue on our job sites. If you're a woman, if you're LGBTQ, if you're a person of color, it does not matter. You were treated equally and with the same respect that everybody else on that job is. There is no higher person than anybody else. And I believe that that is the exact same way that we need to treat these issues in this state. Nobody is above anybody else, and everybody deserves the same treatment and opportunities in this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Don, this next question starts with you. Last year, we saw the Alaska legislature consider, but ultimately not advance, something that's called a red flag law that allows courts to confiscate the firearms of people considered an imminent danger to themselves or others. Do you support that kind of legislation, or do you believe some other effort should be made to address Alaska's rate of gun violence and gun death?
I think we definitely need to look at it. I think that if somebody has a mental issue, we definitely have to oversee that before we give them weapons. And I'm very disappointed in our state as far as for caring for the mental health of our residents. People are just crying to get help for the mentally ill. And I think that's where we need to be concentrating on, is getting help for a lot of these folks. And I don't think that we'll have a gun violence if we can do that.
Andy?
This is a question of our time, how critically important to keep our children safe, our families safe. The bill that had the hearing, I know some of the concerns brought up were that people who have a mental health issue may not seek help if they thought they were going to not be able to keep their guns. And I know we want to protect Second Amendment rights in the state of Alaska, but we have to also balance how do we address our mental health needs. And so that's really important. Also, what's important is counselors in school, red flag alerts when you see a child showing some signs of trauma.
Thank you, Andy. Jerry?
Mental health diagnosis is very important, and it's often not done in all cases where it should be. I do not support a red flag thing, and I don't support it because my experience at the police department, I dealt with that. I had the ability to take weapons away from people that were in a position where they might harm somebody else, and for public safety reasons, there is that ability already in place, and it's being utilized throughout the state, and it has been for many years. That's why I don't support the red flag. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. Sarah?
I absolutely would support a bill like House Bill 75 by Representative Tarr last year, the so-called red flag bill, that would institute and give families the opportunity to go before an impartial judge and demonstrate that a family member was suffering from a crisis that made guns in the house a danger to them. We are a state that leads in suicide, and of course the ugly statistics are our males commit suicide at a higher rate, and it's correlated to our gun ownership. And We have young men who commit suicide in an impulsive act, and having families have a tool that does not permanently remove but gives them the opportunity to stop an impulsive behavior is important, and I think we should do it.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I would be supportive of that. I think being a gun owner, there is a responsibility that comes with that ownership. Keeping your guns locked up, making sure that people don't have access to them. And that would include if you're having a mental health crisis or if you're feeling suicidal and your family sees that need, or your friends or your spouse, I think there should be a mechanism in there to remove that threat. We do. We have the highest rates of suicide and domestic violence and spouses killing, men killing their wives in the whole country. We're number one. And that is not a good number. I think that we should have a mechanism where you can temporarily have that danger removed from your house to prevent any further harm.
Thank you. And for folks at home and folks on the stage here, we have time for 2 more questions before closing statements. That won't give us enough time for a whole third round.
You want me to answer the last one?
Appreciate the offer. But the second to last question, we'll start with Don, and then we'll go back to our first round style, advancing from Don to Jesse to Chris and down the line. Oh, I did skip Jesse. I'm sorry. Please go ahead. I got ahead of myself.
So on the red flag law question.
Yes.
I appreciate it. So I would support a red flag law if it's well written, if it's carefully written. We've heard others say Alaska leads the nation in suicide. We lead the nation in men killing women, and too often women they live with. So there's no question rights matter. I'm a civil libertarian. There are 10 important provisions in the bill, or clauses in the Bill of Rights, not just 9, not fewer than that. So due process is important. But we have an example to look to in Alaska. Under Title 47, you can actually take someone's freedom if they're an immediate threat to the life of themselves or others. Certainly taking a firearm temporarily is a somewhat lower standard than that. So it's going to take a judge. It's going to take more than just an accusation. But I think there are situations, short of taking somebody into custody, where we can protect public safety and rights at the same time.
Thank you, Jesse, and apologize for the mistake. So as I said, 2 more questions and then closing statements. The second to last question is about the recent United Nations report on climate change and potential impacts upcoming. And the question from this person is, given that report, what should the Alaska legislature do to, if anything, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And starting with Don, going to Jesse, and down the line.
I do believe that we need to be looking at it. I've had conversations with many people that are very concerned about that issue. And as fast as the ice fields are deteriorating, I think that we do have to make some kind of changes. I think we need to go more into the renewable resources and wind energy where we can, and hydro energy, and reduce it as much as we can.
Thank you, Don. Jesse.
Thank you. On the Juneau Assembly, I was proud to support our energy plan. It calls for getting to 80% renewables by 2048. It's an ambitious goal. It's frightening to think it might not be ambitious enough. The state needs to take a piece, maybe a small piece, but a piece of our oil revenue and invest in renewables if Alaska's going to have a long-term energy future, which our economy and our people need. So it's going to take incentives for home heat, whether that's heat pumps in Juneau, or solar panels in Gustavus and Haines, or run-of-the-river hydro and other places. It's going to be tailored to the Alaska community, but we need some incentives, we need some investment, and some help for Alaskans to make those transitions so that we can have a strong energy future and people can afford to live in our communities in the long term.
Chris.
Yeah, as a father, we need to be taking care of our energy needs and this planet now, so that as our children move into adulthood, they have a planet that's worth living on. We need to be investing in green technologies, hydro, solar, wind power. We have an obligation to our kids to be doing that now. You know, we have waited way too long. I realize that we are a resource-rich state, and we depend on that. But there is no reason that we can't be investing in these technologies. And as we move away from the fossil fuel industries, be trading one job for the other, so that one, we're not impacting our state economy, but two, that we're not devastating the earth for our children into the future.
Sarah?
Yeah, it's perhaps that strange irony that we're a fossil fuel producing state who's suffering the most from our production and wealth, and it's taken us a long time to even articulate that. And we need to address it. We need to put money into making sure fossil fuels are not how we spend the 21st century. We need to reduce our carbon footprint individually and as communities. The state needs to invest in small, local, renewable energy sources. Heat pumps work in Southeast. They don't work in the interior, apparently. Permafrost is not good for heat pumps. But we won't have permafrost much longer at this rate. So we need to be aggressive about it, and it's an investment in money that we make ahead of time.
Jerry?
Thank you. I think we need to do at the state level what we've been doing at the city level, which is encouraging the development of clean energy. Jesse mentioned the energy plan that we recently adopted at the city. We need to look at our roadless rule as it applies to our ability to develop hydropower in Southeast Alaska. And the more we can develop that hydropower, the more we can move away from utilizing the fossil fuels and do that. The state could look at incentivizing, like they did a few years ago with the energy rebates on the doors and windows that we had a few years ago. We could look at doing that the same way with electric vehicles even, and we are in a perfect place to have an electric car.
Thank you, Jerry. Andy?
I wholly agree we should go back to doing home energy audits. I think that was really a good step in the right direction, and we should be doing that. I also think that we want to be making sure that we look at the Climate Action Leadership Team report that the governor has going and evaluate the solutions in that. I also know that having a fiscal plan is really important for the state because it can encourage private investment in our state and clean energy sector growth.
Thank you, Andy. Our last question tonight, and starting with Jesse, what proposals to increase voter registration and participation do you support?
I'm so glad that Alaska has the PFD voter registration. I think there are some steps we need to take to make that run a little more smoothly. I think there are some steps that can lower the cost, but registration should be as close to universal as it can be among all the people who have the right to vote. It's vitally important that Alaskans call the shots. Not those of us with enough ego to put our names on the ballots. Alaskans need to be the check and the balance and the decision makers. So I think that we can move in that direction as well to increase voter participation of vote by mail. It's going to be important that folks have a place they can cast a confidential ballot in every community. We won't save all the costs of elections, but I think we can save a lot of money, and we can make voting more convenient for more Alaskans. Thanks.
Chris?
So outdoor knocking, I learned about ranked choice voting. I think if we look at instituting a policy like ranked choice voting, that might encourage voters to get out and be more involved, as they'll feel that they would have a little more involvement in the process. I think that we should look at creating our election day as a holiday so that people have the opportunity, much like, so that people have the ability to get out and vote and don't actually have that excuse to not show up. Encourage it. Vote by mail would be important, an important piece of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
I absolutely am thrilled that Alaska went to the easy registration to vote with PFD, and I think that we take any opportunities we can to register as many eligible citizens to vote as possible. I also think that a mail-in ballot is a great way to go. Some states do it exclusively. Not sure that Alaska's ready to go there, but I think Anchorage demonstrated great success with their most recent municipal election, much higher voter turnout than we get. And I also think we need to talk about restoring of rights to former convicted felons to make sure we have a clear and easy process to navigate to the number of Alaskans who've temporarily lost their right to vote, and they don't know that they can get that vote restored. And in some communities, it becomes cumbersome to do it because you have to go to a local judge and prove
Thank
the
you, Sarah. Jerry?
Thank you. We've taken a big step with our PFD voter registration on increasing the voting rolls out in town. It is critically important that not only are you a registered voter, but that you're an educated registered voter. I think the state could look at perhaps providing or incentivizing transportation to and from the polls, getting to and from the polls. I'm a little leery of the mail-in ballots because I'm not sure that we can guarantee their validity all the time. So I have a little concern about the mail-in ballots, but I think everybody should engage in the electoral process
Thank you.
and get out and vote. Because I
Andy?
still had a few seconds left, James. Now,
Andy?
Yeah, so important that we're all involved in weighing in on who serves for us and any initiatives and things that we have on the ballot. So yes, I'm in favor of looking at all different ways. I also remember Mara Early's government class encouraging us to go down to 16-year-olds voting, starting younger, kids voting, getting educated, discussing more at home, and encouraging that wave of excitement about voting. And I know kids voting, doing it in the elementary schools, all those things to make it a natural process. The kids see it and embrace it. And I really think it was so smart to go to the PFD and being able to register there. So ways we can make it easier is good.
Thank you. Don?
In a couple of the contracts that I've negotiated over the years, we give people an hour off from work to go vote, and it really made a major difference in our turnout from our locals when you give them the time off to go do it, and it made a major difference. And I'm really thrilled that I helped work on the PFD voting registration, and I think that's going to make a big difference too of getting people out to vote.
Thank you all. We'll start with Chris for closing statements, 1 minute each, and then that'll be it for tonight.
So thank you again to everybody. Thank you to everybody up here on the stage as well. This has been a very educational experience, and I've had a lot of fun going through the past 7 months on this campaign. And thank you to my family as well. It's been a huge impact on my 3 children and my wife. So a huge thank you to the 4 of you for putting up with this for the last 7.5 months. I'm an independent candidate. I'm a lifelong Alaskan. I love this state. I'm running to fight for my children. I'm running to fight for your children. What we've been doing in this state and in this country with partisan politics, with left versus right, is not working. It is time that we start electing candidates that are willing to work together with one another and stop throwing rocks across the aisle at one another. That is not working. We keep doing the same thing over and over, and it's not serving this state well. So I'm asking you to please vote for me on November 6th, and let's get this state working together.
Sarah?
Thank you for all of you for coming out tonight. I'm running because I think I have some skills to contribute to this job that I'd like you to hire me for. And I think I've been talking about them for the last 7 months, that I can work with anyone from anywhere. It is one of those skills as a classroom teacher that you've got to figure out how to move everyone forward together, how to unite around a shared goal, even if you believe there is a different reason for doing it. My husband's home in Radio Land, so I should thank him for holding down the home fort. It's a strange process to have a citizen legislature where we don't expect people to have professional expertise, and then we ask them to make complex decisions. And what I can tell you is I'll always do the homework. I'm never afraid to ask a question. I'm always going to tell you where I stand, and I will always speak up because I think that helps us make decisions together. Thank you, and remember to vote on November 6th.
Thanks. Jerry?
thank you. Well, I've been committed to this community for a long, long time. As a police officer, I pledged my life to protect this community. I then pledged to faithfully serve for another 6 years on the Assembly, and I've done so. I'm capable. I have delivered 6 balanced budgets in my 6 years on the Assembly. I'm prepared. I've dealt with a breadth of issues from the budget to education, which we have consistently funded to the cap and beyond, land management, public safety, which I was integral in getting funding for 5 more positions at the police department and nearly doubling their recruitment budget, health services, infrastructure, nearly 40 million set aside in the future for water and wastewater treatment infrastructure, and increasing staffing at the fire department. I care, and you can't invest as much time as I have in this community
Thank you, Jerry.
unless
Andy?
you really care. Thank you.
Oh, thanks to everyone for being here tonight and for those who are listening, and thanks to my family for being such a support to me. Tonight was an emotional night for me. Right before here, I had my last school board meeting after 15 years, and I want to tell you that the trust that parents place in the schools and their teachers and the system is huge. They drop their kids off at the doors expecting us to take care of them. I care deeply about this community. I care deeply about our future and where we're going. And I have to ask you, are we funding the things that we value in our budget? Your budget resources the work of your state, and we need to be strategically investing in the things that we care about. And what I've been hearing at our doors is public safety, good jobs, and education. I would appreciate your vote, and thank you so much for all you do for our community.
Don.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, James, for doing all you're doing here. And I've been in this state for a long while, longer than some people's even been alive. And I really want to do what's best for our state, and I believe I can. I've knocked on over 6,000 doors in our community, and I've talked to people, and I've got a fair idea of what we're looking for as far as our community, and I know that I can work with the legislature, and I've already been offered a position in the majority, and I will definitely be working as hard as I can to make our state a better state and get our budget in order so we could have a stable budget and get off the roller coaster. So I ask for your vote on November 6th, please.
Jesse.
Thank you. Thanks to the Empire and the League and KTOO. Appreciate the techies in the back room making us look and sound good. Well, I mean, lights can only do so much for the likes of me. But I appreciate as well my family. Karen and our daughters have sacrificed a lot. We've talked about a lot of big issues tonight. Alaska legislature has a whole lot of work to do for the future of our state. We need to build a sustainable budget so the private sector can grow. We need to educate the next generation, improve our public safety situation, maintain and build our infrastructure, and have a level playing field for all Alaskans. Those are my priorities. You've seen me work on them on the Assembly the last 7 years, and you've seen me work with everybody. The Assembly doesn't play on teams. We work on solving problems. In the legislature, that's what I'll do. I will work for our district, for all of Southeast Alaska. I'll stand for the principles we all share to solve problems, to build our future for the next generation. Thank you. I respectfully ask for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you to all the candidates for participating tonight. Thank you again to forum sponsors KTOO, Juneau Votes, the Juneau Empire, and the League of Women Voters. Thank you also to audience members for providing great questions and to you at home for tuning in. Without you, this event would not have been possible. Remember that the election is Tuesday, November 6th. That's Tuesday, November 6th, so put it on your calendar and circle the date. If you can't vote on Election Day, you can vote beginning October 22nd at the State Office Building and in the Mendenhall Mall Annex. Additional information on the League of Women Voters of Juneau is available online at juneaulwv.org and on Facebook. For the Juneau Empire and KTOO, I'm James Brooks. Thank you.